to start to connect charities and companies and donors around issues related to higher impact. And those of you who are on the philanthropic side understand that the concept of evidence-based philanthropy has been around for quite some time. It's been somewhat controversial, but we also know, I think, collectively as a sector and those associated with the sector, those associated in business, that the expectations are rising. People are expecting more demonstration of impact. They're looking for that impact in the form of data and analysis, and they need that to demonstrate at the company side their return on their investment, whether that's a financial or social investment. And on the charitable side, it's what I call proof of life. Is what you're doing and what you say your mission is actually being achieved, and how do you prove that through data and analytics? So we're beyond the stage anymore of doing well by doing good, and I just wanted to use that to begin to tee up the discussion and the conversation that we're going to have. And for those of you who may have come on late, just a reminder, if you have questions, you can type them in. We will gather them. We will try to respond to them either in our comments, or we'll get to them. We're going to allocate at least 10 minutes at the end, and then we will also be able to continue the discussion offline afterwards. So Mo, if we could move on to the next slide. This slide as well is something that many of you will be familiar with, but it's basically the validation of what we're talking about in terms of how behavior is now starting to follow action. So, we're well into our second decade of research that clearly shows the cause and effect of being a socially responsible enterprise. This is all data points that you can see on the screen there from Cone Communication. We've seen others that have been involved in the research around this as well. And so what we do know now is that customers and stakeholders absolutely do take into consideration a company's or an institution's social responsibility footprint and reputation when making purchasing or other decisions. If we go to the next one. So as Mo was saying, this shared values concept is not conceptually new. Michael Porter wrote about this obviously many years ago. But the idea that we're talking about here is really kind of the semantics challenge. When you look at this visual, we tried to put together kind of what we're calling the shared values continuum. You could also call it a timeline. And if you start back and looking in the 50s and 60s, when the acceptance and professionalism of corporate philanthropy and workplace giving happened, that began then with the modern CSR that started to emerge in the 70s and 80s as a result of regulatory and financial sustainability pressures. Then we saw cause marketing happen in the 80s, Statue of Liberty, all kinds of campaigns. I actually was involved in the Statue of Liberty campaign and others at that time. And then we then saw the codifying and legitimization of social responsibility in the 90s and 2000s as an actual area of expertise that companies were beginning to hire people for. People were getting formalized training. We started to see a few of the business schools begin to talk about that. But what we're talking about is a new phase beyond CSR to creating this shared value proposition, which combines these and other functional areas and strategic areas into a more sophisticated and integrated look at shared values. And, in addition to these things that you see on this chart, we're talking about the other areas of CSR, of supply chain management, corporate governance, government relations, HR, consumer affairs, and other areas. Well, if we go to the next one. So I do that just to tee up the meat of the discussion, which Mo will lead. But I also want to point out, as he said, that there is when we sat as a team and we talked about the semantics and we talked about the difference between CSR and shared values programs, we agreed that for a CSR program to be considered somewhat sophisticated, it would really need to embody these characteristics that you see here on the screen, which I've built in this little slide starting from the bottom up. And you can agree or disagree with whether these are specifics, but generally these are the buckets that you have that CSR program that is a modern one. You need to have C-suite buy-in and formal executive level support. When I was at Booz Allen in the early and mid 90s, while I did report to the chair, our biggest challenge there, as I'm sure some of you have, was actually getting the other C-suite executives involved. And in a company like Booz Allen, where it's a partnership like a law firm, you know that even though the CEO sits on top of the pile, the partnership is a partnership. So it's actually a little more difficult to manage expectations coming out of the CEO's office when you have competing expectations at the other partner level. But nonetheless, we achieved this C-suite buy-in, and we were able to get a cadre of advocates among the other partners to begin to get that formalized executive level support. Second, it needs to be embedded in your planning and budgeting processes. From speaking with many of you at different conferences, I know that one of the biggest frustrations that CSR professionals have had historically, or corporate philanthropy professionals, is that it's a core function, but it is not a revenue generator per se. And getting to the point of our discussions today, it's sometimes difficult to demonstrate and articulate and back with data your return on investment to the company, even though we know both intuitively and through narrative and anecdotes that it's there. Third is need to have accountability throughout the enterprise, and that's building that and embedding it into the work performance objectives of senior managers and senior executives and department heads and business unit leads. Needs to be supported with professional support. Many people in corporate philanthropy and workplace giving come from areas that may have been with a charity, may have come from another part of the company, and the movement towards issues around sustainability and the integrated nature of a shared values proposition requires ongoing professional development and training. And finally, at the top is that it needs to be driven by strategy. You need to have key performance indicators that are measured. And most importantly, you need to be able to use all this to communicate effectively to your key internal and external audiences so that they act with the behavior you hope they will have. So, this is, for lack of a better way of explaining it, kind of the pyramid or buckets of things that create a more sophisticated and a modern CSR program. Now, if we could go to the next slide, Mel. That leads us to one of the common challenges in a shared values environment that the shared values professionals face. And I think that most of us who've worked in corporate social responsibility or corporate philanthropy, or on the charity side working with companies in corporate relations and cause marketing roles, we are, by the nature of our work, shared values professionals. But that doesn't exactly address the challenges that we see, and we hope that we will begin to develop solutions for. So on this next slide, we have a slide that is the required skill sets. And without going into great depth on these, you can read them for yourself, and there's others that should be on here. The bottom line is that most corporate giving, corporate philanthropy departments are under-resourced. You don't need me to tell you that. You have to fight for resources with other departments. The irony of that is that many of those other departments and other stakeholders in the companies are exactly the people that you must have in order to have a shared values approach. You need to have integration among all these functions, and you need to have champions in all these functions. So as a core corporate function, unable to sometimes provide the data and analytics that you need to show a valid return on investment in terms that are important to the company and to your shareholders, what often happens is you're trying to create the ability to do that within your own shop. And I know this, again, from my experience at Booz Allen, when in fact, the tools and resources to do that not only reside in other parts of your enterprise, those are, whether they know it or not, your advocates, and you are all part of the shared values professional continuum. We go on to the next one.
Yeah, Steve, just before we move on, just a real-life example that we recently learned about. So we spoke to a multinational manufacturing company, and the precedent set for this company's CSR initiatives were very focused on what's considered ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as well as compliance, really. Now, because of this, their entire CSR team was filled with environmental compliance and really safety specialists. And when we spoke to their VP of CSR, his question to us was, how are we supposed to address communications and marketing related challenges when most of our team is comprised of environmental specialists? And this is a recurring theme. I mean, depending on the nature of the company, we see and we find that the CSR team or the shared values team really is comprised of folks that don't necessarily have all of the experience that is necessarily needed in today's environment. And the struggle that we see there is either you have to bring about some sort of knowledge renaissance, which is a very, very daunting task, or we imagine that there has to be some sort of turnkey solution to help companies like this multinational manufacturing company that I'm talking about, regardless of the background of their shared value professionals, actually operate in today's environment. So I just thought that was an important example to mention on that.
Well, Mo, I think that's that is an excellent observation, and I would ask those of you who are on the call if you have either similar or disparate experiences. Even if it's not in the form of a question, just let us know by typing it in there if you agree or if you think that we're off base. But I think, based on my experience as well, what happens is that in a classic CSR or corporate philanthropy or corporate giving department, the tools and resources available to you are those that you can hunt and gather for yourself. And as opposed to perhaps what might happen in a marketing environment with a product marketing group, where they have, because they can show through data and analytics and hard numbers, the impact they're having on the bottom line. They have access to corporate research. They have access to legal staff. They are coordinating with the sustainability group around environmental issues. And our sense is that from people we've talked to that it's very frustrating because the expectations on the corporate social responsibility officer and the shared values professionals that are in that role is to begin to demonstrate your value and the value of what you represent in the company and in the community in ways similar to other departments, yet your availability and access to the resources that some of the departments have is not there, and it's an unrealistic expectation to expect you to be an expert in all those things. So that really kind of leads to the next slide, which is what we end up doing. We end up spending a lot of our time, as I said before, hunting and gathering on administrative tasks. I'm very familiar, for example, in the world of workplace giving, with how much time folks spend on identifying their technology partners that will help them drive workplace giving campaigns and do grants management, to do volunteer placement, on and on and on. And these systems, some of which are more integrated than others, but mostly it's a lot of administrative time. It's a lot of things that don't coordinate. And so we end up doing what I call hunch marketing. We have a good sense that we're having impact. We can count a lot of activities. We are certainly doing good and probably doing well, but it often is a situation where we need to do more than that. And you'll hear from Mo in just a moment, because what he said at the beginning is my belief too. It's why I've come to the table with 242 Solutions. Is I think the idea here is that we need to have, we need to be able to automate some of these repetitive processes. We need to drive that lead, but we also need to show how that has shared value to the other shared values professionals that are in our institutions. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, I want to get to you. I don't want to spend too much more time on this if we could.
Okay.
So I think the next slide is basically how do we measure our initiatives. And again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail because I've just discussed how I think many of us do. And I suspect that we're on a various place on the continuum in terms of sophistication. There might be some folks who are already, and there probably are, doing a lot of things I'm saying. But I think most from our experience are struggling with this, and they are looking for better solutions and a community in which they can share their experience. So if we could, before we move on to the shared values framework, which Mo will share more about, I would like to know, by either your silence or questions that you might post, if we've kind of captured the challenges in general that you or your clients are facing, because I know a number of you on the call are representing consultative groups that actually do work with companies as well. I want to know if we've got this problem kind of pegged, and if so, that's great. If not, share with us comments about what you think we need to consider as well. And if you don't want to do that now, you can do it after the fact by letting us know by email or through our community space that we're going to set up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Mo to drive the bulk of the presentation. Of hopefully, through my experience in both the corporate side and nonprofit side and association side, tried to share my experience and what I perceive to be some of the core problems around the shared values professional experience and where we need to go. So I'm going to send it on over to Mo.
All right, thanks very much, Steve. So just a quick case study on the last slide here around the $1 million question, as we call it, measuring the initiatives and showing ROI. And I'm just going to talk briefly about this as you guys submit any questions or comments that you have. So we recently spoke to one of the world's largest clothing retailers about this very challenge, the measurement challenge. And what we were very surprised to learn was that they had a CSR team comprised of about 35 people, one of the largest teams that we've honestly heard of as part of our research. And we asked their head of CSR what their biggest challenge was, and what he told us was very, very surprising. The overwhelming majority of the staff at this particular retailing company spends the majority of their time aggregating, designing, and writing none other than the annual CSR report. And I was so surprised. I asked him how it was possible that 35 people were working 5 days a week, the entire year, and just working on one 50-page CSR report. And he told me that it really was the truth, given all of the repetitive data collection and writing and so on and so forth, just from a reporting standpoint that has to be done. So to me, he really stressed the need for finding a way to automate the repetitive tasks in order for them to even have the time and the resources to try to address some of these larger issues like measurement. I mean, they don't even have the time to be thinking about them because of how much time just keeping up with the next event or the next report or the next design deadline happens to be. So I just wanted to share that before we move on here. Okay. So all of these changes, these three changes, to us represent a huge shift in society that we all know cannot be ignored. And to us, the question is, how can data, systems, and processes help us tackle these challenges? Like I just mentioned with, the retail brand, they need a lot of help with, just the day-to-day to even get started thinking about some of the really complicated things like measuring ROI. So how do we use data and systems to tackle these challenges? Well, we're going to talk about what we call the shared values methodology. But before we really dig into that, let's just describe what we mean, especially by the first process within that shared values methodology. So we believe that in order to create shared value, companies must seek to operate from within the shared values of their communities, within the shared values of their communities. So what does that mean? So we believe that any brand, any company has three primary constituencies. There are more, but primarily there are three constituencies. There are employees, there are customers, and there are shareholders or stakeholders. And ultimately what we found is very few companies are integrating the affinities that all these three constituencies really care about. So we'll give you a quick example of why this actually matters. We spoke to one of the world's largest appliance makers about their CSR strategy, and for a long time, they partnered with a very famous nonprofit, specifically because the leadership team was passionate about the cause. You know, at some point, their CEO and their CFO and the rest of their C-suite got together, and they decided that, you know, this particular cause that, you know, a particular nonprofit was focused on was what they would do. And, you know, after pouring millions of dollars into the partnership over a few years, they tried to measure how the perceptions of these three communities, the employees, the customers, and the shareholders around their brand, changed as a result of the partnership. But what they ultimately found was that these perceptions did not change much at all, and in some cases, they worsened. Now, think about that for a second. You know, you have a Fortune 500 company that, you know, where the C-suite, you know, based on their own affinities, defined the entire CSR strategy for thousands and tens of thousands of employees. And ultimately what they found was that the strategy didn't actually resonate with the majority of their employees, customers, and even their shareholders. So who did it in fact benefit? Well, I mean, at least you know, in this case, the C-suite who decided upon the strategy, you know, felt something about it. But in reality, all the key business KPIs that ultimately translate to higher performance for the company didn't move at all. And to us, you know, all these, you know, all of these kinds of situations really underscore, you know, the importance of understanding the shared values of the community around your company before even embarking upon, you know, upon defining your CSR strategy. So that's just something that we wanted to sort of describe before we jump into what we call the shared values methodology.
And Mo, this is Steve. I'd like to just jump in because as somebody who worked with CSR officers, philanthropy folks, and was one myself, you know, I think the new language of the shared values professional to me is very intriguing because, you know, so often the semantics have gotten in the way. It's even around corporate social responsibility. There's not unanimity in what do you call these functions? Is it social responsibility? Is it community affairs? Is it community relations? And I think, you know, what this does is it somewhat takes the emphasis off of the name of it and takes the entire business functions that are collectively needed for this social responsibility or reputational or whatever or sustainability profile that you as a company want. And it empowers and engages the rest of the company in helping achieve that mission and creates a collective community of people who are all shared values professionals. And I love it conceptually, and that's why I got excited about this.
Great, thanks for those comments, Steve. And yeah, I mean, this is you know, it seems like to us one of the very, very sort of natural things. I mean, if you employ thousands of people, and people at the end of the day are really what make up your company, employees, customers, and shareholders, you know, they should be at the table when it comes to defining what it is that your company does when it comes to CSR. So moving right along, we believe that there are three main components of what we're calling the shared values methodology. And so first we talked a little bit about, you know, identifying what those shared values are. Then there are steps 2 and 3, operationalizing those shared values, and finally measuring those shared values. So what this process really encapsulates is sort of something that we consider to be a virtuous cycle. There is no such thing as a CSR strategy that you can set and forget. Nothing. I mean, sorry if you're used to setting and forgetting it, but it's not going to work in the world of shared values. Why? Because what happens is that the affinities that people have, what your employees, what your customers, and what your shareholders care about, guess what? It changes. And in order to really be constantly be reevaluating that, there needs to be a cycle that iterates through these processes over and over again. So, step one, identifying your shared values, that's the stage at which you're planning the strategy, showing the potential value to, other key stakeholders at your company and getting your budgets approved, setting your benchmarks, operationalizing that strategy by executing the program, initiatives, campaigns, and partnerships, and then finally measuring that impact, and showing the value of the program to, again, the different stakeholders in the company. So this is what we call sort of the virtuous cycle of the shared values methodology, and we believe that it's a great playbook for really, if you look at the shared values continuum that we define, anybody that really is part of this shared values continuum, whether you're in corporate philanthropy, workplace giving, sustainability and compliance, cause marketing, corporate social responsibility, or if you're futuristic enough to call what you do shared values, this process is relevant to really all these areas and even other areas that we didn't have enough room on the slide to include, like ESG and others. So let's break each part of the shared values methodology apart, right? Let's break apart what it actually means to identify the shared values, what it actually means to operationalize the strategy, and what it actually means to measure the impact. So identifying the shared values. Ultimately, there needs to be some sort of scalable, repeatable workflow by which the company is able to literally ask the employees, the customers, and the shareholders what it is that their convictions are. The process of identifying shared values should ultimately result in what we call common convictions. Common convictions. The process of identifying shared values should result in the identification of common convictions between your three primary communities: your employees, your customers, and your shareholders. And we're in the process of actually publishing a tool to help really provide a turnkey solution for all three of these areas. So we're very excited about that. But the identifying shared values part in particular is something that is not easy, right? I mean, when we spoke to one of the world's largest manufacturing companies about this, they call it a materiality assessment. It's a common term, especially for manufacturing companies that are really involved in compliance. They call it a materiality assessment, and what they do is they survey thousands of their employees and thousands of their customers and thousands of their shareholders to understand what those constituencies consider to be risks. That's why it's called a materiality assessment. They're trying to identify risks for the company. Now, manufacturing companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing these materiality assessments, and ultimately it can take between 6 months and a year to actually do. The reality is that's just too slow, and it's too expensive, and it takes too much time. And so, there needs to be a more scalable way, a faster way to get, the common convictions among your employees, customers, and shareholders. But that's an area that we believe, is very, very important, the identification of shared values to really build a great shared values strategy. Okay, so that's really step one. So step two in the shared values methodology is about operationalizing that strategy. So once you have the common convictions of your three primary constituencies, where are you going to tell that story? Is it going to be on the internal company's intranet? Are you going to be externally telling that story? Is it something that matters enough to the community around your brand that you want to publicly tell the story? Do you want to tell it on social media? Do you want to tell it on TV? Do you where is it that you want to tell this story? Who do you want to tell it to? There might be a very particular audience that you are trying to sort of move the needle on as part of your shared values program. And that also is part of operationalizing the strategy.
Hey, Mo, this is Steve. I'd like to jump in here for a second because I think you've made a really, valid point here, and I want to give a shout out to my old friends at America's Charities, because some of the research we had done there. And we've done it collectively through a group called Charities at Work, which are other charitable federations that operate. We partnered within that space. We were starting to see this gravitation towards the unpackaging of these silos around how companies pick the issues, causes that they're involved with. And I realize that's only one aspect of what we're talking about here. But I think the good news is that companies are trying to think more strategically about this. The challenge is that it's hard to break through those silos, and it's also hard to it's been hard to bring in kind of the resources that are dedicated to philanthropy and volunteerism and begin to demonstrate through the process you're talking is how they materially impact the broader shared values proposition that a company has. And I think that integration has been the problem. I think people identify it and understand it, and they're in varying degrees of trying to address that dilemma, which is exactly what you're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Out of all three of the steps here, the I, the O, and the M, as we call it, identifying shared values, operationalizing the strategy, and then actually measuring the impact. Out of all of those, the operationalizing part, I think, is where most people get hung up. I mean, that's where we hear today. Most of the CSR professionals that we talk to, it just takes way too long. So the main thing is automate. I mean, do you really need to be pulling, data manually to show to your direct report, to the folks that you report to about what happened? No, you really need to be, handwriting some of the analyses around, a research project that you're doing, focusing on a particular sustainability issue. Probably not. And a lot of these repetitive things that, again, CSR professionals are mostly doing to write their annual reports, frankly, can be automated. And that doesn't take, I think what we've heard is CSR professionals want it to be automated. It's funny, sometimes, I know especially from building other companies, people sometimes have a negative perception around automation. But in this case, it's been very welcomed by the folks that we've spoken to. So that's step number 2, operationalizing those strategies. And then finally, this is the step that we're most excited about, and we've been pouring our hearts and minds and souls into really solving this problem, which is measuring the impact. So, and this has a lot to do with basically, the gap between, the experiences that a lot of shared values professionals typically have, and the kinds of skills and tools and resources that are needed to actually measure impact. Like, what do you need? Measuring impact seems like a very data-intensive, problem to solve. You probably need some sort of tool. You probably need some sort of training. You probably need some sort of framework, decision-making framework, to actually stitch together the narrative of how you're actually moving the needle. So what we say is that shared value programs should initially, and there's many ways that you can do this, initially they should be benchmarked against how they are driving 3 key things. So the first is financial metrics. How is the shared value program actually making an impact on the financial performance of the company? So again, as just a side comment, we're very excited to be, working on this particular problem and launching a solution for this. So stay tuned for that. But how are you actually supposed to show that, for all the initiatives focused around a particular cause that the company, sort of supported, how much financial value did that initiative drive for the company? That's one area to measure, financial metrics. Then you get to, employee related metrics. So to what extent do the initiatives that we have drive things like employee engagement and employee retention? If we can show that participation in some volunteer programs, participation in some of the initiatives that the company is doing actually changes the perception and the trust that employees have with their employers, and that can be a very tangible way, again, to get buy-in from the C-suite and other key stakeholders at the company.
And this is Steve. I know we're running a little late, but I think this is an important point. You've actually hit on an area in which there has been some very recent and solid experience around connecting volunteer engagement, the ability for employees to volunteer, the abilities for them to be able to give at the workplace and be involved in pro bono and other kind of company-sponsored activities. There has been, I'm trying to recall who did the research, but I know it's recent, a direct cause and effect that relates to employee retention. And when you can say through data and research and studies that employees have stayed because of these things, you can then correlate that directly to the cost of having to retrain, rehire, and there is data out there. So this is an example of where in one slim slice of this, people have either intuitively gotten there or because it's a manageable aspect, they've taken that. So there is some progress that's been made there. So that's a good example.
Absolutely, absolutely, there has been. And by the way, you know, it's important to note that we know that, and you know, we're friends and colleagues with several of the folks in academia that have and are currently researching some of these topics, right? And in particular, I mean, the link between CSR and a company's financial performance was illustrated more than a decade ago. So that's not anything new at all. But what really got us interested in this space was showing the magnitude of that impact. Yeah, sure, it's good for the company's financial performance in some way, shape, or form to really do CSR well, to really do shared values programs well, but how much? And how does it affect different parts of the business, right? How does it affect customer satisfaction? How does it affect employee engagement? How does it affect different things that cost the entire value chain of our company? That's what we're really excited about, and I think that's where we're going to have a very exciting opportunity to innovate. But the measurement piece is something that, again, we hear from all kinds of brands, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in a CPG environment or auto or anything. The measuring the impact is a key to getting, you know, more basically buy-in from stakeholders across the enterprise, and I think that's a very, very important point to understand. So those are three key parts. You know, they should be thought of as the core tenets of the shared values methodology. Now, there are many things that we would do before starting the first step, identifying shared values, and actually after measuring impact. And you know, we'll go into the details of those in one of our next webinars. But these are just the core tenets of the methodology. Okay. So next, what we want to talk about is how the shared values framework fits into modern corporate hierarchies, because this is very important. You cannot be on an island of your own and expect to change the way that your entire company operates. Now remember, what we're advocating for is actually a very drastic change. Now, I'm going to go back to one of our early slides here with Professor Michael Porter. We're advocates of an entire business model change. Now, you know, we also realize that you have to kind of crawl before you walk and walk before you run. But ultimately, this is where we want to get. We believe that, you know, businesses can generate, you know, value for their shareholders as well as, you know, value for society simultaneously. There doesn't necessarily have to be a trade-off, and a lot of the research that Professor Porter has done illustrates that that may even lead to more, you know, shareholder returns. So, so why is that important when we talk about, you know, modern corporate hierarchy and how the shared values roster, so to speak, really has to be arranged to operate very, very effectively? So what we've seen is that CSR professionals and sustainability professionals and corporate philanthropy professionals and really all the folks that fall on the shared values continuum predominantly fall under two categories. I think it would be, you know, it would be difficult for us to identify too many examples where, this is not the case. But what we've seen a lot is that either these teams are ignored from, the key decision makers at the company, the CEO, the board, the CFO, the CMO, or they're isolated, okay? Or they're isolated, or they live on an island of their own, and everyone knows that every quarter or every 12 months, this is the group of people that built our, CSR report on all the great things that the company did. But we believe that the key to really integrating this concept of shared values throughout the modern enterprise is to make it integrated. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that there has to be a fairly sophisticated system of having ambassadors, shared value ambassadors, at each and every one of the key business functional areas for the company. So marketing has to have, one or maybe even a few shared value ambassadors. Finance and the CFO's team has to have a few shared value ambassadors. Operations, supply chain, product development, manufacturing, technology, you name it. All of these areas, if we really want to get ultimately to bring about this massive change of actually creating shared value, both value for our shareholders as a business, as well as value for society, we have to make the concept operationally of shared values integrated throughout the entire enterprise. It can work, again, if there is, a champion or a group of champions that, are responsible for bringing about this change at the organization. So it's great that, a sizable chunk of the Fortune 500 now have, chief CSR officers or chief sustainability officers. That's great. And it's also great that in some of the smaller companies that they don't necessarily have, as many, executives, but, they have a lot of people that are actually working on the front lines to try to show how the company can make an impact in society. But again, the key, we believe, is that the shared values mentality and the shared values strategy is integrated throughout the enterprise. And that's very, very key to actually making our goal of creating shared value very realistic. So ultimately, where this leaves us is, we believe making the greatest impact on both social and business progress. To do that, leaders really must become shared values oriented. And so not only are we going to be talking with, and we want to talk with everyone on the shared values continuum, but this idea of creating shared value, we believe should really be, should really be involved with other parts of the organization as well, not on the shared values continuum currently, like marketing, like finance, like operations, etc. So just a couple of key, takeaways. We believe that it's still, very, very early innings, right? Early innings for all you baseball fans. It's a very nascent area, and many shared value professionals don't have access to the processes, systems, and data that can empower them to new heights of program administration. And this is an area that we're investing a lot of resources in. And again, if we have not addressed the challenges that your particular group is having, then please contact us. We want to be, the saving grace in this case. We want to build a solution for you and your teams. The second takeaway, we believe, is, look, the reality is that pressure to show how shared value programs drive impact is higher than ever before. And what we call the IOM, Identify, Operationalize, and Measure Shared Values Framework, is one great way to get started. Look, the reality is that before we get to showing ROI and really automating things and making our lives easier, we have to put a process in place. Again, we have to crawl, walk, and then run. And then finally, while the place of shared value professionals in the corporate world has definitely matured, the teams, generally speaking, are relatively small. And for us, this underscores the importance of having ambassadors in different departments that shared value teams can partner with to drive adoption. So again, the shared values methodology, we believe provides a blueprint for success in a shared values economy. And the shared values economy, that phrase we believe is really emblematic of all the changes that have happened both in the business world and in society that bring about the potential for us to create shared value for both sides of the matter in this case.
So Mo, this is Steve. I do have some questions that have come through. So we have about 5 minutes or so to stay on formally, and I'm sure we could stay on a little longer for others who want to continue in listening to the discussion. So one question is kind of one I had posed as well, which is we seem to have a chicken and egg approach. We need to have leadership buy-in in order to get the resources we need to be able to generate the ROI. And this question is posed to you, Mo, is how do we do that? How do we engage leadership and get them to buy in to this shared values approach that you've described?
Well, so I think that there's a lot of existing resources that are available to shared value professionals to really make the case to key stakeholders at their companies on how large of an impact this can actually make for their company. And what I would recommend is for those that are just on the cusp of getting buy-in from the C-suite or are having trouble getting buy-in from the C-suite, do some small experiments. For example, we conducted a survey about 6 months ago where we found that, and we surveyed about 100 C-suite professionals in the Fortune 500 around CSR, and over 2/3 of them actually underestimated the impact that CSR has on their business. So, I think that the answer to that is try to identify small experiments where you can use data to actually show the relationship between the social mission of the company and how that has effects throughout the different parts of the company, whether that's related to customers, employees, or shareholders, and I think make sure that the entire organization has access to this idea, because this idea is not necessarily ubiquitous. There's a small faction of people, but very brave souls, that try to champion this idea. But if we can evangelize the concept and show examples of how other companies have really put into place this balanced framework, then I believe that that's a great first step in order to get buy-in from the C-suite. Look, we want to crawl before we walk, and we want to walk before we run. And the way to crawl to get buy-in from the C-suite is to first identify a couple of small experiments that can show some value, and then put something more robust into place.
Got another good question here, and thank you for that answer. It's a great answer. I'm going to just read this. What if we're already using the sustainability index as a benchmark to measure success? Can or should the index be integrated with other data sources? Do you believe the index insufficient to measure progress, and if so, why? So I'll leave it to you to unbundle any one of those three related questions or tackle them all.
Yeah, so I'll just show something on my screen really quickly. If you are already using the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, I urge you to actually read a little bit about how that's actually calculated and what that means. So, and a great kind of summary of this is right here. So, one thing is that the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is based on the idea that we're going to ask companies how they think that they're performing, which is perplexing. Now, imagine if I asked you how well you are doing. You might think that you're doing very differently than you actually are. And so it's like that, brings about a lot of concerns, not just, from us, but from the rest of the community as well, around how accurate can it really be if all you're doing is just asking the companies how they think that they're performing. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is that the reality is that in the grand scheme of things, this is primarily for large companies, right? So 2,500 largest companies in the world are included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. If you don't fall within that, then you're not big enough for them. So, but we'll definitely talk to the folks that don't necessarily fall into that group. But if you're a large company, honestly, the metric, the means by which you measure impact at your company for how CSR or shared values drives impact has to be customized. It has to address the nuances of your industry. It has to address the nuances of the period of time that you're looking at. It has to address all these kinds of things. And ultimately, the other thing is just very quickly here, you'll see one of the criticisms of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is that, again, there is a huge reliance on company data. So not only are you asking the company, but you're also just looking at, company reports. So like one input is like the company's, annual report around CSR, the environmental reports, health and safety reports, so on and so forth. And, that might be one thing, but if you're not actually changing the way that the people at your company feel, the employees, the customers, and the shareholders, these company reports might be showing one thing, and the reality in people's hearts and minds might be another thing. So, not saying that this is not a useful metric. We've done a lot of research around the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We believe that it's a great way, it's a great high-touch way to get an understanding around how public companies are doing when it comes to social responsibility. But we believe that there's room for improvement.
So one last question I have here, and again, I'm going to paraphrase it. We're already admitted past our time, but I think this question is worth asking, is for those companies who aren't Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000, but are more mid-cap, or if they're privately held and are not, their stakeholders are more narrow perhaps, are the tools that you're creating, will it help provide a simple or basic kind of an out-of-the-box solution for those kind of mid-cap companies who perhaps haven't even started doing any of this integration, but understand the importance of having of not only demonstrating but sharing and communicating their shared values proposition?
Absolutely. So one of the key things that we're working on right now is the very, very first step that's involved in getting started with the shared values framework at all. And that shared value is just really understanding what the best practices around shared values are, really closing that knowledge gap. So we're building what we call the best practices hub. And, what this actual feature will do is it will encapsulate a lot of the best practices by proven experts that are advocates of the shared values methodology have done and how it has worked. And we're going to communicate this in very, very condensed ways that is really easy to understand and easy to operationalize right off the bat. Next, what we're doing is actually taking that first version of the tool is going to have a means by which this setup of ambassadors throughout different parts of the company, and really making sure that there's a systematic approach on how frequently you're talking to these ambassadors, how these ambassadors are given information and data around the initiatives of the company's social responsibility efforts. We're making that process really, really streamlined. And so to answer the question more directly, we're not building this for a particular size of the company. So it's not for large companies or small companies or mid-sized companies. It's a tool for if you want to completely integrate the shared values methodology into the way that you do everything from corporate philanthropy all the way through the shared values continuum to corporate social responsibility, everything that you need from A to Z to put that into place. Again, the process, the knowledge, and the automated approach to getting all these things done. So we definitely don't, we definitely don't, have a narrow focus only on large companies, and we believe that there's a huge opportunity even for mid to smaller companies, mid to smaller sized companies to really put this methodology in place.
It's about 5 minutes after 2, Bo, and I know I have to go, and I suspect a lot of the people on the call need to run too, but I would like to say that for those of you who are still on the call and those of you who know others who might have want to be, or if you've heard what you've heard is interesting to you, what we're looking for a few people who'd be willing to get on the phone and share with us their thoughts and feelings about what we're talking about and get into some more of the detail, almost as a kind of a semi-advisory group. So if you have interest in that, just let Mo know, or if you know me, let me know. You can go to my LinkedIn page or Mo's and get our email addresses and let us know that. But other than that, Mo, I'm going to give it back to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, just a few quick thoughts. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We're glad that you were able to make some time and tune in. Please reach out to us if you'd like to discuss anything further. I know there are a few questions here that we did not get to, and thank you for those of you who did submit your questions. We will reach out to you directly and get in touch. And what I'd just like to say is this is a webinar series, so please do stay in touch and tune in for our next webinar. We'll be getting a lot more specific around how you can actually do IONM as part of the shared values framework and really utilize that at your company. And ultimately, we want to become the source of information around the shared values methodology. So please do feel free to reach out to us. And that's about it. So we won't take any more of your time up. Thank you again for attending. And again, if you have any questions, any comments, any disagreements, anything like that, please feel free to contact us, through our website, or you can email us directly, or call us if you'd like, and we'd be happy to chat. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. And with that, we'll end the webinar.
Good afternoon.
Thanks.